Let's give a warm welcome again to Robey.
Okay, hi everyone. Thanks for coming today. I'm Robey de Jong, and as you can see, I haven't been so mobile lately. I suffered a serious knee injury during field hockey a couple of weeks ago. But luckily, that was not, it's sad, but luckily that was not my only hobby. I have a broad range of interests, which started when I was a little kid. As many of you could agree with me, that bringing a smile on people's faces is priceless. I'm raised in a family that started an NGO when I was a little kid. The NGO is called Cosmo Queen, and Cosmo Queen enables people to develop their own skill in the textile industry, to enable them to become socially and economically independent. Today, I'm the vice president of that NGO, and it makes me very proud to see so many happy and eager people to develop themselves. But on the other hand, I love all the opportunities that are in the data science field. And I've had the privilege to work with lots of companies and people to make better informed decisions. When Rabobank asked me to join their Data for Food program, I had no idea that they, or banks in general, offered a program where both of my passions, doing good and data science, could be combined. When I joined the Data for Food program, I learned that if you go back 130 years, that Rabobank was one of the few financial institutions that financed farmers. Over the years, Rabobank evolved into a world finance bank focusing mainly on food and agri. And that is when we discovered that there is a huge need to fulfill, when over 181 million farmers worldwide experiencing a lending gap of $79 billion. So no access to farmers for those 181 million farmers under suitable conditions. And that's just not acceptable. Because smallholder farmers play an essential role in the economic life of most developing countries. They have 2 to 50 acres. They sell 50% of their produced commodities to off-takers. So the commodities could be lettuce or potatoes. And they sell it to off-takers, which means just someone who would like to buy it, for example, a market. And with that, they earn a salary of 50 to 150 US dollars per month, which is often not enough to grow their produce. So they are in need of additional money. And given this group of farmers accessing money is very important to fight poverty, to improve local and global food security. We could give them a fish to feed for one day, or we can teach them how to fish, and they will feed themselves for a lifetime. And that's why we told ourselves that we need to identify what is the problem. And we identified 3 problems why this lending gap exists. We discovered that value chain actors, so that are companies that are involved in the value chain, which means like wholesalers, retail companies, companies that sell seeds or that produce the food, they're willing to pre-finance smallholder farmers, but they have difficulty assessing the risk of funding these smallholder farmers. They also have problem with resources are available for their funding, but they are restricted. And I will tell more about that later on. On the other hand, you have companies that have the resources available and have no restrictions in any way to finance these farmers. And they do so, but under very unsuitable conditions. So, for example, a very unrealistic payback time or very high interest rates, bringing the farmer in even more problems in the long run. And that's one of the reasons why they decided to start Credit Connect within the Data for Food program. So Credit Connect aims to determine the creditworthiness of smallholder farmers in order to involve value chain actors of the risks involved, which means helping value chain actors if they will get their money back or not. But determining the creditworthiness is much more difficult than we initially expected. Because Rabobank have billions of financial transactions, but not on our target audience, the smallholder farmer. When we approach a problem like this, we break it up 3 ways. So we do data, we look at modeling, and we look at usage. Since the relevant data is not available within Rabobank, we had to talk to our internal expert of the food and agri industry to learn what the factors are that influence farmers and the commodities that they are producing. So that is why we identify those 11 data types that says something about the ability and the willingness to pay back of a farmer. But within companies, you often notice that, or actually also on social or online platforms, that people talk about, for example, satellite data or environmental data. But these kind of buzzwords are not helping us to make a precise estimate about what factors influence farmers and which factors have a predictable impact. So if people tell you, just use satellite data, tell them that we have to look at the elements behind it or even the sub-elements, because this gives us deeper insights about what has impact on a farmer's productivity, profitability, and its behavior. So if we look at environmental data, for example, it consists of 5 data elements. It says something about biomass index. Oh, you can't see it. And let's apply these elements on a farmer who grows the most popular plant in the world. Has anyone in the audience have any idea what that plant is? Rice. Rice? Other suggestions? Corn. It is a coffee plant. So as many of you probably don't know, actually I didn't know it, is that, for example, the Arabica coffee bean, so the espresso, is a particular sensitive species coffee bean of the species of the coffee bean. So if we look at that coffee plant and we apply it on environmental data and we look at the temperature, then we learn that the temperature for this coffee plant should be between 18 and 21 degrees Celsius. Too high or too low, and the berries won't grow correctly and no beans will be produced. If we look at precipitation, then we see that this plant needs a specific amount of rain, and it needs a 3-month dry season to flower. And if we look at, for example, geographical data says something about non-natural characteristics and natural characteristics. For example, here on the top it says altitude. A coffee plant should grow on a specific altitude. If we're too high or too low, the plant won't grow correctly. If you look at farm and field data, for example, it says something amongst others about the soil quality, about the crop protection used by the farmer, but also about the crop or crops that are planted by the farmer and the crop cycle. When do you expect the farmer to harvest and pay back? If we know that the farmer is growing a coffee plant already for 1 year, we know that the coming 2 to 3 years, no berries will be produced. So the farmer is not earning any salary. So the farmer becomes actually a bad farmer if that's the only crop he is producing. For the market data could predict about the demand and the prices being paid at a specific moment in time. And it could also help us to estimate what the profit of the farmer potentially going to be. However, then the farmer KYC data, that's called know your customer data, becomes important. Because if we look at households composition, for example, if there are children involved, it's highly likely that school fees needs to be paid of those 50 and 150 US dollars he's earning per month. So, but you need to be very careful what data to collect. In parts of India, it means bad luck to count the number of children. And so along the way, you encounter many more industry and cultural bound restrictions, which you need to take into account. So not only having the data is important, it's also important to know and to understand the expert knowledge you have around these data. Otherwise, the wrong conclusions can be made and relevant data cannot be recognized as such. The 11 data types can be gathered in multiple levels of detail. So if you look at this range, if you look at the right side of the range, for models to be scalable over countries per type of farmer, data should be widely available. But if you look at the left side of the range, for predictable models per individual, the model improves with more detailed data. So for scalability versus predictability is a trade-off needed for every data type and for the model you're going to use. And based on our understanding of the situation, we chose that the optimal point of our model should combine highly predictive farmer factors with widely available region factors. And that's why we decided to collect the data points that are circled in orange. But then what is your data collection strategy? Who has these data? Which data providers do they have? What data do they own? As well as, are we allowed to use that data? Data collection is a very time-consuming phase. Because data providers promise the world, but they can only deliver a small piece of it. But how do you discover the credibility of the sales pitch of a data provider in an early stage? So that's why we came up with this three-step approach. So the first step is who could potentially be a data provider? When we have identified this, we started with an online research to find as much information as possible about these data providers. And we were interested, okay, we're going to contact them. That's step 2. We conducted the first interview and we used a predefined interview template with questions needed to be answered by the data providers because we said it is very important to figure out if our selection criteria were met. So when that was satisfying, we asked the data provider to send a data dump because we have noticed that it was often not sufficient enough and the data was not of good quality when we had a look at it. So a third step is then that you invite them for a second interview. And during that second interview, they discussed the results because one of our selection criteria was that the data set should at least have 5,000 farmers with all 2 crop cycles. And that was what we discussed with them. And then we can also ask them if they were, in future, we're planning to collect that. And if they were interested in it and we were interested in their proposition, we discussed the potential collaboration. And the second step to approach this problem is modeling. So it's determine the target, it's determine the payback time, and identify factors that influence farmers the most. When you're in university, a data set is provided with a target column which says yes or no, correct or incorrect, or 1 or 0. But in reality, this does not exist because you're trying to predict something. So the first step is to determine your target. What is a good farmer and what is a bad farmer? And is a good farmer someone who pays back his credit, so reaching 0, but not paying back his interest rate, so above 0? Or is a farmer a good farmer when he pays back his credit and his interests, but exceeds the payback period? We decided to define a good farmer as someone who pays back his credit, but not necessarily his interest rate on time. And now we've talked about the farmer. Let's look at the commodities further. Because commodities have different crop cycles, which actually mean the annual cycle of activity of growing and harvesting a plant. Activities like loosening the soil, seeding, watering the plant, moving the plant when it grows bigger, and harvesting. For example, lettuce. that grows fairly quickly, 6 to 8 weeks. But potatoes take on average 3 months, depending on the variety. But if you look at coffee, it's a particular labor-intensive plant. And the berries are hand-picked throughout the harvest season, which lasts 4 to 6 months. So if you would like to set a payback time, do you set it on a specific time, or do you set it on the particular farmer that requested the credit score and the crops he is producing and the accommodating crop cycle? We decided that, or actually we learned, that if you would like to make a very predictable model on individual level, you build a model per commodity. But if you would like to make a very scalable model, then you set your payback time on 9 months. Because in 9 months, most of the crops can be grown, can be harvested, and can be sold. So after the 6 months, if they are exceeded and the farmer is not paying back, we say it's a bad farmer. And when the most important factors to build your model on are identified, together with an expert, these experts should remain closely involved. In part because for most of these data types, not a lot of historical data is available yet. And also because you would like to validate the output of your model extensively with those experts. But also, of course, you're going to test your output of your model based on your test set. But we've learned that it's not enough to test your model on that complete test set and, for example, per commodity. Because we've learned that apparently loan performance varies between the markets the farmer does business with too. So for instance, in Kenya, we were confronted with anomalies. So markets are outperforming each other. They show different behaviors, or markets have an agreement with the farmer. If you're not aware of it, we train a model in a different way. It could also be that a market is not paying back the farmer on time, consequently. Why the farmer is not able to pay back his loan on time, making it all of a sudden a bad farmer without having any influence on it. And this is the reason, and actually also, it could also be that governments have agreements with markets which influence the farmer as well. So that's why you need to know in an early stage how you're going to validate your model, as well as based on which criteria. The third step to approach a problem like this is usage, because a project doesn't finish with the model. As a well-known saying of George Bach says, all models are wrong, but some are useful. If you have the output of your model, how can it become a starting point of an action? And this is also a question I particularly love as a designer in me. So the first step is to learn as much as possible about your end user. In our case, that's the value chain actor. To get a better understanding how they use a credit risk assessment as a service. And we've learned that they like to log in on a dashboard. Dashboards looks like this. So then we learned that you need to understand and find out as soon as possible what is the unique identifier that value chain actors use to identify a farmer. If you're logging in, so imagine that Kiabe, a farmer, just requested a score. And you need to determine if the loan will be issued. You need to log in into your dashboard, and then you learn that you need to retrieve the data of that farmer. And we've learned in Kenya, but it could be different anywhere, that a unique identifier of a farmer in that country, in the region where we made the first version of our model, is the phone number of the farmer. So we retrieve the data of Kiabe, and we calculate the score. When a score is created, you need to determine what the scale is of the score. And you need to determine how many buckets you're going to create. For our first version, we decided to use the FICO scale, which is widely adopted within credit modeling and within banking. So it's a safe choice. And we will learn along the way if that's the right one, and otherwise we will adapt. So this scale shows the output of the model, the applicant score. But what do you do if a value chain actor would like to learn where the model is based on? Then the model should be calculated in a different way. Then the model should be calculated first on the elements underneath score-based 1. And then together, these outputs, these scores, should be calculated to the final credit score. So why do we classify the score?
Why do we use the terminology bad?
Bad, see, that's a good one. But that's something we should find out. That's what we've learned from the value chain actors, that they choose that name. But we're just in the initial state of this project. But it's just really something to take into account. That's also what we're exploring. If we would like to include a recommendation section, we put it in there to see if we could help them improve. So it does not necessarily mean that they're bad, but they're scoring, have a low score on one particular element. For example, here you see one red dot. So if we could help him improve that, and sometimes that could be very easy, then they could turn green easily, and then we can become a good one. So harsh, yeah, I know. I agree with you. Thanks. We collect feedback everywhere. So I talked about 3 factors that we need to tackle. It is data, it's modeling, and it's usage. Because it's needed to tackle those for a problem like value chain actors not able to determine the creditworthiness of smallholder farmers. You need to ask yourself the question, how do I find the right data? What do we try to achieve in our metrics? And how do we make the model useful and a starting point of an action? But you don't tackle a problem like this on your own, because you're dependent on data providers that help you with the data. You're dependent on experts who help you understand what you're trying to predict. And you're dependent on value chain actors who help you with the funding. But they don't have the capability and expertise in-house to build the credit risk assessment as a service. And that's where we as Rabobank step in. And when the ecosystem is in play, the movement can start to reduce the risk around lending to smallholder farmers. And this is how we as Rabobank help smallholder farmers around the world. This is how I bring a smile on the face of smallholder farmers. And this is how we grow a better world together. If you are eager to make a difference, and if you're passionate about food and agri, about data science, and about doing good, please let me know. We're always looking for new and bright minds. Thank you for your attention.